Good morning. I'm Charlie Redner, the host of Writers and Readers. We're happy you joined us this morning. Today we're going to be talking to an author we had earlier this year, Don Westenhaven. And Don's here with another book. And I was so thrilled his first book was called Alexander's Lighthouse because setting was so important. Today's book he's written about, its setting is so important again. It's 1920s in LA. I knew nothing about it. I was thrilled to read the book because it's an exciting drama, but also I learned a lot about the early 1920s right here in the LA area. Good morning, Don.
Good morning, Charlie.
How are you today?
Feeling great.
Yeah? You going to tell us about Missing Star?
I sure am. Should I go into the beginning of it?
Yeah, just give us the synopsis or read off just tell us what the whole book is about, the synopsis.
The synopsis, the basic synopsis is that it's a guy that comes back from the war, the Great War, World War I.
Right.
He's a fighter pilot, and he comes back hoping to get together with his girlfriend, and comes back and find out she's missing. So that's where Missing Star comes from. This guy's name is Danny Parker, and he's a Marine, a pilot wounded in the Great War. He returns home to Long Beach, California. And he's hoping to reconcile because he and the young lady had not really left on good terms. She had thought they were going to get married. He decided to join the seminary to be a priest, and then after a couple of years he quit that and became a Marine. And then he finally comes home like 5 years later, and she's now a silent movie star.
Wow.
She's moving up in the world. She's playing opposite important actors that people would. That were famous, and so she was quite an actress. But when he gets home to try to reconcile with her, he finds out that she's been missing for 3 weeks, and so a whole bunch of the book is trying to find her.
Right.
And so he's going through kind of being an amateur detective.
Okay.
So he searches for her by going to her apartment, and he finds her diary hidden away, and there's a bunch of important clues there as to where she might be and who she was hanging out with. So he takes it from there. And that's what the book's all about, is trying to find her.
And the thing that excited me also was the setting. And you were telling me in earlier talks that there were 4 major industries here in LA then?
Yep.
And they were?
The aviation. With McDonnell Douglas aircraft in Long Beach and other places. We had the automobile industry. They manufactured cars in the LA County.
That shocked me and surprised me, yes.
Yeah, and this was actually in 1919. Before the 20s had even started, they were in these 2 industries. And even before that also was 2 other industries. One was the entertainment industry with Hollywood.
Movies, right?
Movies, yeah. Silent movies in those days.
Of course.
And then the other big one was the oil exploration. Which,
that one really surprised me.
We're going to hear about that this morning, too.
Wow.
In Long Beach and Signal Hill in particular, but up and down the coastline, Seal Beach and every place, they had a bunch of oil rigs operating before 1920 even started. So those 4 industries were very important to the world.
That really surprised me.
Long Beach was a major player in each of them.
Was Texas in full swing then? You know a lot about the oil industry as well. So.
Yeah, Texas was in full swing, and of course your home state, Pennsylvania, had oil rigs. And
we did. We were very early, weren't we, back there in Pennsylvania?
Yeah.
Yes.
Around 1880 or something like that.
There's even an oil city, PA there somewhere.
Yeah.
Out near Pittsburgh, I think, north of Pittsburgh.
So that's what Missing Star is all about.
Okay. Well, let's get into your reading a piece so we can learn the style and get hooked on this book and let it rip.
Okay. The story begins with the hero Danny flying a biplane over France, bombing the Germans. A dogfight ensues, and Danny is shot down in no man's land between the Germans and the Americans. He fights his way back through the German army to get to friendly lines. And 2 months later, he's finally recovered from his wounds and walking into a bar in New York City on New Year's Eve. It's an Irish pub. He's wearing his Marine Corps uniform, and everybody's buying him drinks. He's limping with a cane still, and walks into an Irish and meets this young lady. And they drink beer and they flirt in the noisy bar. Everybody's singing Auld Lang Syne and that, celebrating the New Year and celebrating the end of the war.
Good.
The next day he jumps on a train and heads back home to Long Beach, California.
Okay.
So with that, I'll read this part here on this one page. It starts out, just as the sun set, the train rumbled into downtown Long Beach, the train station at Pine and Ocean, 3 miles west of his dad's home. Danny called him to come pick him up. As he waited, he looked around the station, transported back in time 2 years when he'd waited at the same station, not for his father, but for Joyce Villarreal. He was leaving for Marine boot camp and hoped she'd show up to say goodbye, good luck, I'll miss you, I'll wait for you, or some other sentiment. Finally, he had to board the train. He stared out the window, looking for the girl he loved so much, yet not enough to pass up the seminary or the European fight. The train jolted and began to move almost imperceptibly. The station slid past at a snail's pace, with the train gaining momentum. The crowds on the platform held little flags, waving them at the departing passengers. Thomas and Walt were there, of course, and suddenly Danny caught a glimpse of a girl rushing toward them. Perhaps it was wishful thinking, he thought sadly. Returning today, he stood outside the station keeping an eye out for his dad's Model T, the 10 Lizzie. He watched at least 20 Ts putter along with a smattering of other makes and models. Most Model Ts were black these days. They'd first been produced in different colors, but in 1909, Henry Ford had proclaimed that a customer could get the Model T in any color as long as it was black. And over the years, he'd phased out all the other colors. The T featured different body styles, some with roofs, some open air. His dad's was an open air two-seater, and Danny saw him waving half a block away. He felt a burst of pride and love. Thomas had had a pretty hard life, losing a wife and his life savings years ago, but he remained cheerful, optimistic, and friendly. He loved automobiles and was happy to drive, repair, or simply clean them up, especially the sportier models like his current Roadster. Thomas pulled the brake lever, leaped out of the car, and wrapped Danny in a bear hug.
Thank you. And Danny's what, about 25 or so?
Yeah, he's about 25.
Yeah, and I learned something there when I read the book, obviously, that really shocked me. I thought the Fords always came in black, and they never had the colors, but apparently they started out, well, I guess, with white and pink and blue and orange. And
yeah, a lot of different colors.
that was a surprise to me because I always thought, I knew the slogan obviously was very famous, you know, you can have it in any color as long as it's black. But
I think the idea was that it was cheaper to do all the same color.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure about that.
I wonder about that too. So he's coming home from the war. He's been wounded. He's getting better. And he comes home and he's looking for this girl and she's missing. How did we find out she's missing? Did we go to her house or go to where she was working? What happened?
Well, he visited her dad, who lived on Signal Hill.
Right.
Danny and his family lived in Long Beach toward the ocean. So anyway, he got on his motorcycle after being home a few days and drove up to see Joyce's dad. He was on really good terms with his dad, unlike with her herself.
Right.
So anyway, he got talking to him, and the dad was really sorrowful and eventually just started getting tears in his eyes and said that Joyce hasn't seen Joyce or heard from her for 3 weeks now. She's been living up in Hollywood by the observatory.
So what the idea from that, I read in the introduction or the very beginning of the book that your grandparents came out here in what years? 1919?
In 1922, they drove to Long Beach from the Midwest with their, they had one infant daughter, and that was in 1922.
That would be your grandmother?
Yeah, my mother's parents.
Mm-hmm.
So they drove out here, probably in a Model T, and they bought a house in Long Beach, about 4 blocks from the ocean, and it was pretty cheap in those days, of course.
I'll bet.
He was a plumber. Anyway, they eventually had 5 children, including my mom, and all my relatives lived in Long Beach the whole time I was growing up, and some of them still do.
Was that what gave you the impetus to write the book? The fact that you had some history of early days in
it really was.
Long Beach?
I had written 2 novels that take place 50 years ago, and had written 2 novels that take place 2,000 years ago. I wanted something a little bit different, and I had always wondered what was it like for my mom and my parents, my grandparents to live in that time period.
Do you remember conversations with them before they died? And
just a few, and I wished to God that I had asked them more questions because I'm so curious.
Every author that comes here says the same thing. I wish I had talked more with my grandparents.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a shame that we don't know more about our ancestors.
It's true.
I'm trying to improve on that with leaving some stuff behind for my own descendants,
Yeah, I had a video done of my life story already. As a young woman in Hollywood, actually started a little company just before the virus hit, and she's doing this for people, and I think it's a great thing. It's a living memorial, and it also tells the story of what your parents, grandparents, and maybe even a little about your great-grandparents.
Yeah.
So
in lieu of that, I wrote a book by doing a bunch of research about what Long Beach really was like and looking at a lot of photographs and that sort of thing.
Did you just decide it would be a missing person rather than a murder mystery or some other?
Well, I like to find a lot of suspense, and I like to pick a good setting. As you mentioned, settings are important.
Yep.
And this was an exciting time and place, and so that creates some of the suspense right off the bat.
Oh, it did. It did for me, yes.
Yeah. So I eventually landed on a search for a young lady because I really like books that tie together men and women, and then there's, of course, all kinds of, most books probably are written about relationships like that.
Yeah.
So
we had selected another interesting section of the book. Do you have that handy?
I have that handy, yeah.
I would like to hear you read that.
First, leading up to it, there's about 10 chapters in between the two.
Right.
And this one, as I write in here, during the next few chapters, Danny reunites with his dad and brother and several friends, and he's stunned to hear about the former girlfriend, Joyce, missing. Joyce and he had been best friends since first grade. They grew up together. They ran all over Long Beach and just played a lot together at the beach, sports, running, playing ball. They were sweethearts, and then they were sweethearts in high school and beginning to fall in love. And they broke up when he entered the seminary thinking to be a priest. I've mentioned that already. Joyce was deeply hurt and furious with him, and she moved to Hollywood to be an actress. He eventually joined the Marines. So now he finds this diary, and he learns a lot about what was going on from that, a lot of clues there. So, so that's where we get to the part where we are right now in the book. And he's taken a job at an oil company in Signal Hill, and that's what this is about. This is an excerpt from chapter 13. On February 14th, Danny reported to work at 4 p.m. as usual. Almost immediately, he felt the earth tremble beneath his feet. He looked up at the wooden derrick, heavy beams bolted together vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. A square footprint, 25 feet wide at ground level and 10 feet wide at the top. A wooden ladder ran all the way to the top, 100 feet above him. He'd been up there once on the platform, and it had made him nauseous. Somehow sitting in an airplane getting shot at was more comfortable than sitting on top of a pile of wood, perched over a hole deep in the earth, getting closer each day to a primordial pressure cooker. As the earth continued to tremble, Danny was glad he was down here and not up there. The three men on the highest platform waved frantically. More workers were inside the derrick on the deck, 8 feet off the ground, and they jumped down and sprinted away from the rig. Danny heard a metallic crash and saw the 2-cone drill bits toppling off the pallets. The ground shifted again, harder this time, and he heard a roar like 100 freight trains. Suddenly, a dark brown fountain tore up through the derrick all the way to the top and then beyond. He saw one of the men fall from the top platform and cartwheel to his death. The top 10 feet of the derrick, crown block and all, was ripped loose and blown into the air. Almost as large as an automobile, it turned gently like a kite as it fell toward Danny. He sprinted to the left as the splintering hulk crashed to the ground right where he had been standing a second earlier. The rough wooden beams, coated with oil, broke apart with a terrible noise. The oil shot out 150 feet high and cascading toward the west, out over the stately new homes in Crescent Heights.
Wow. Now, you were in the oil industry. I hope you never saw one of those things blow, because I've seen, obviously, in movies and things, that is a frightening thing.
Oh yeah.
To
I had
observe.
never seen one in person. No.
No, I mean,
Not crashing like that.
those pipes go up, 100 feet in the air and come crashing back down, and everything in its place gets crushed. I mean, it's
Oh yeah.
got to be something.
There's a lot of metal pipe way underneath the ground, and they're hooked together in, I think, 30 or 40 feet segments. They're all just screwed together in one
Right.
string, and once that breaks loose, it'll tear the whole thing apart.
So we see Southern California with oil rigs all over it. Look, I've seen photographs. They're worse than Texas. I mean, it just bumper to bumper, if I can use that analogy, all over Southern California here, all over what is now, I guess, L.A.?
There were, yeah, La Brea tar pits is a good example of,
Yes.
of the oil in the ground there.
Yeah.
The tar anyway. And yeah, you can look at old maps and show where the oil was in LA County and Orange County. And it was going everywhere in those days.
Are there still some out there?
Yep.
Because I've driven through Colorado and I've seen them. They're not the big rigs on it. They're just the pumps going boom,
Just the
boom,
pumps.
boom, boom.
They're like rocking horses.
Yes.
There's still a lot of them in Huntington Beach,
Really?
pumping oil out of the ground. I play golf in Fullerton, and there's a course called Coyote Hills, and it's still got, as you're working your way through the brush on a golf course, it's got this all these rigs. Some of them hiding behind structures, but most of them out in the open, just pumping away.
That's amazing. So what was writing this book like? Did you just sit down, I have the story in my head, or did you do a tight outline, chapter by chapter? How does it work for you?
I worked through it chapter by chapter. I sort of knew where it was going.
You know the end. Everybody has to know their end, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
if you don't, you're going to
Yeah, you do. Yeah, at some point, you got to know how does this end?
Yeah. So I describe it a lot on all my books. I describe it as if you're walking through the fog. The stuff that's nearest to you, you see most clearly, but the stuff that's 4 or 5 chapters down the line, you're not quite as sure. I have 2 manuscripts going at any time in the writing process. One of them is a complete manuscript, and the other one is a summary of the chapters, so I can keep track by just at a glance, find out where did I last talk about this particular subject. That helps me organize it.
Did you have to move chapters around? Did you?
I did.
Yeah.
And it's tedious work, as you know.
Absolutely.
Because you move a chapter, and all of a sudden you're throwing off maybe some errors that fell apart now that you have moved where that was in the time sequence.
I know the first novel I wrote, I started writing, and chapter what was 1 became 2, then it became 3, and it actually ended up, there were 5 chapters that preceded where I thought I was beginning. So those things happen to you when you're writing. But you have to know the beginning, you have to know where you're starting out, and you really need to know the end, but the whole middle can just come to you, can't it?
Yeah. You know, you've heard this many times, but authors sometimes will say that their characters start leading the way.
They absolutely
do. You get
do.
to know your characters, and and then they say the characters will surprise you and do something.
Absolutely.
Maybe it was subconscious.
No, I can tell you that personal experience. Yeah, it absolutely happened. I had this character driving north on the 10. By the way, the north 10 runs north and south in Arizona. And I thought for sure she was going to go to Texas, which means you follow 10 to the right, which then goes east and west, and you go east, and nope, she kept going north. I didn't know where the heck she was going, but she had an idea where she wanted to be that night.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of fun when it gets to be like that.
It is fun. It is fun. It is fun.
Yeah, I had my very first novel, I had about 6 chapters talking about something that happened in 1949, and I had it at the beginning because it was all chronological. Right. And somebody said, no, you need to start out with the main story, which is 1985 or something like that. And so I had to change a whole bunch of sequences. Oh, yeah,
and then all the dates and everything. As you move those chapters, all kinds of things go kaplooey. Yeah, that's true. So this was your latest book that we're talking about out of the 5 you've written?
Yeah, I had 4 previous books, and I like to think I learned a lot along the way and got to each book being a little bit better product, I believe. But I've got fans that like each of the 5. But I think this latest one's my favorite book because of not only its personal personal drive behind it for me, but just the fact that I know more about writing then.
Yeah. Have you taken any classes, or did you have any critique groups that you worked with on any of your books, or?
I did, of course, as I've mentioned, I still am in the Southern California Writers Association. And we meet once a month and have professionals come in and talk to us.
Right.
And so I've been doing that for over 10 years now, and I've learned a lot over those 10 years from that group. I did join a professional group, but only a little bit, and I found out that it was taking up too much time because there were so many people in the group. But I did have beta readers.
Oh, I was going to ask you that. Did you have any?
Yeah, and I used more beta readers on this last book than I had on the previous ones.
How'd that go?
It went really well. I typed up, well, I printed off out of the computer the manuscript, and I made about I had 6 beta readers, so I made 6 copies of it. Put them in punched paper and put it in binders.
Yes.
And I gave each of the beta readers a binder. And I said, I'm going to make this as easy as possible for you. Just annotate your binder, and I'll combine all of the binders and make whatever changes I think are needed. And that was an immense improvement in my book.
Really?
Yeah, because every one of the 6 was looking at it from a different angle.
Right.
Some of them more clerical and some of them more plot.
Yes.
And when I combined all that stuff, it really turned out good.
Ex-friends now, or
No.
it's
Still close
It's an
friends.
obligation to accept that. It's an honor, but it's also an obligation.
It is.
I'm going to read your book, and I'm going to be serious about looking for things that might improve it.
Yeah.
In any area.
Out of the 6, 2 of them moved away. So I'm going to say I still have friends.
I don't know if I'd have any left if I asked people to read all my books.
Yeah.
I've never done that. I've hired an editor. I've had a line editor and a book editor go through my books, but that's obvious an expense. And you ask for your beta readers to do it.
I thought about getting an editor many times, and there's so many difficulties with it.
Yes.
The money wasn't an obstacle for me. It was mainly the issue of, first of all, what kind of editor, because there's like 4 different kinds.
Yes.
Each be more sophisticated than the other.
Right.
And secondly, you don't want to have one of your prized ideas ripped out by somebody. So I just was kind of afraid of what the answer would be.
Yeah, I understand that. And I had editors, but if I'm paying them, I'm still the author. So what I say still has to go as far as, a major decision about that. Let's talk about your other novels for a minute. We can start with the Alexander's Lighthouse, because we did a complete story, book on that. So that's, I was trying to find the order of them, even though there's Whiplash, and then there's the Red Turtle Project and Nero's Concert. What was the order of those?
The way you read them is the order. The first one was Whiplash, and it ended up Red Turtle, and then Nero, and then Alexander.
Okay. And the first book you wrote, where did the premise for that come from? What made you decide that's what
First
you were
of all,
going to do?
I wanted to just make a quick thing on what it is they all have in common.
Okay, go ahead.
All of my novels are love stories, and there's always a heroine that's a strong character and the hero, and so each of the 4 has that. They're not only love stories, they're thrillers, and that there's a lot of action going on.
There certainly is.
And the final thing they all have in common is they're big scope type things. The premise of Whiplash Hypothesis is a conspiracy to ruin the United States economy by manipulating the global price of oil. So that's a big deal.
Wow.
And that's the kind, I not only want an exciting setting, I want an exciting premise that is a big, important thing in history. So each of these 5 books have that kind of premise. In the case of Whiplash, it was a Chinese gangster that moved into Vietnam to become a guy that was setting up a weapons depot on the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the Vietnam War.
Okay.
He moved it over in Laos because the United States wasn't supposed to go into Laos. And our hero was parachuted in with his team to try to destroy that warehouse, that armory. And so that's where our hero meets this girl.
And of course, you've been in the oil industry and you've traveled a lot, so I guess a lot of this is things that you know, right?
Yeah, a lot of this is. And as a Marine myself in Vietnam, I knew a lot of this stuff, and was excited about it.
Yeah.
So anyway, he meets this girl who's the daughter of the gangster, They fall in love. She helps him escape. He gets back, and they meet each other 17 years later, renew the romance, and all of a sudden they're married. And meanwhile, the dad, the gangster, is manipulating the price of oil because, unbeknownst to anybody, he has influenced the president of a small Latin American country who's got a lot of oil.
Yeah.
And he's regulating the flow back and forth to manipulate the supply and demand.
Okay.
So that's that one.
And the next one?
The Red Turtle Project is a little bit of a sequel in that it's the premise is what if Vietnam had converted to capitalism from communism?
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So the young couple that had destroyed the gangster's idea about the oil finally, they inherited $500 million from this guy when other gangsters killed him.
Oh.
Meanwhile, though, he's deposited money all over the world, and he left them the passwords and everything to get to the money.
Wow.
So the couple's traveling around the world collecting all the money, not knowing that the gangsters that killed her father now know where they are. Okay. So they're going to try to get that money.
Gotcha.
That ends. Then they end up in Vietnam, and the story goes from there. The premise for Nero's concert is who caused the Great Fire of Rome in 64 A.D.
Not necessarily Nero, right?
Yeah, this was a real catastrophe, and to this day nobody knows if it was Nero or the people he blamed, the Christians.
Yes.
Most people blame Nero for it. He's accused of playing a violin while Rome burned, and that could be true, except it wasn't a violin; it was a harp.
Yes.
So anyway, the idea would be how does Nero try to prove that the Christians did it?
Gotcha.
And the way he did it was to get his best friend, a former gladiator, to do some detective work and try to find dirt on the Christians.
Gotcha.
Which wasn't easy to do, and he didn't succeed, but I don't want to give away.
No, you don't want to give away your. And Alexander's Lighthouse?
Alexander's Lighthouse, which we talked about last time, is the premise is the Egyptian mob rebels against the Roman occupiers using technology.
Right.
And as we both know well from our reading, that was an exciting time and place.
Oh my gosh.
Very much so. There was Alexandria, Egypt. We think of Cairo today, but in those days, Alexandria was the top place to be in Egypt. They had the museum and the library. There were Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, and Romans all there, all with different angles.
Well, I have to say, I can have, it's not my children, they're your children, but I can say Alexander's Lighthouse is my favorite. So we're going to have to call it for the day.
Okay.
I certainly enjoyed talking to you again, and you're not writing anymore for that, but you're doing some charitable work. We didn't get a chance to talk about it, but that's nice that you're going to be doing some charitable work and put your writing skills to good use there. So I'm Charlie Redner saying goodbye, and thank you for joining us today, and hope you'll come back again next month. Take care. See you around.